This is episode 6 of what is currently called, due to a lack of research and could potentially change, but is still currently called, What is on Your Workbench? Welcome back. For those of you listening, it has only been a week since our last podcast, but for us, it has been a couple of weeks. I've been on vacation or holidays, depending on what part of the world you have been in, seeing the lovely sights, while Chili has been beavering away inside his workshop. But a little bit of housekeeping. This may be a bit weird, but we can now officially announce during the podcast that we are now live and distributed across all the normal podcasting networks. We are still working out some of those details, so bear with us. Obviously, if you're listening to this as a podcast, you haven't had this issue, but just kind of a peek behind the curtain, we do record a few episodes ahead just in case I do go on holidays or vacation, or one of us does, and we don't have a disruption. So as of now, you'll start hearing that during the podcast that, we're available in all the different areas. Leave reviews. There is a YouTube video. Obviously, if you're watching this, leave your comments. It is always appreciated, and subscribe and tell your friends. But that's not what we're here. We're not here to talk about the podcast. We're here to talk about what is on your workbench. And as usual, I'm sitting here staring at my complete mess of a workbench, even though I feel like I haven't even been out here since I got back from holidays. But Chili, I have an inkling that you have been busy. So what is on your workbench?
Well, there's actually not a ton on my workbench physically, which is glorious. I've finished up a number of projects and actually spent some time cleaning up my nightmare of a shop this morning. I feel so fresh and clean. But where we last left off, I teased with this curved piece of oak, if you remember.
I remember.
And that delightful little curved piece of oak is no longer in my shop. But I definitely want to talk about that project because that was a very old child-sized rocking chair that a client brought to me, broken, sadly broken. One of the rockers had come off. One of the back slats was busted. There were numerous cracks kind of all throughout it. It had seen a lot of use and a lot of love over the years, and unfortunately fell prey to some very uncaring movers. So my client asked if it was something that I could repair, and I said, yes, most definitely. I don't do a ton of furniture repair. I do even less restoration. And to be clear real quick, I think there's a major delineation between furniture repair and restoration. Repair is making something function again. Restoration is taking it back to what it was when it, left their shop, left the original craftsperson's shop. And I don't really do that a lot. One, because I don't have the skill set for it. It's an entirely different skill set. Two, I don't like it. I don't like when old furniture looks new, because you rob it of its character and its story. And especially with heirloom pieces that have been in a family for a long time, I feel they should maintain their dignity and keep their stories intact. So I'm going to run through some of the damages I found on this, and we can talk a little bit about what I did to repair them. So the most glaring one was this broken back slat. It's about a 1/4 inch piece of oak, strip of oak, 1/4 inch thick by maybe 1.5 wide. And it was still kind of together. And in the horizontal pieces of the back frame, and it was splintered up towards the top, but it was a really, really weird break. It was like kind of Z-shaped.
Okay.
So the crack was up here, and then it came down along the grain and then went across the rest of the way. So it was still together.
Yep.
And I couldn't get it out of the piece without really damaging, that break. And what I had to end up doing was I had to decide either to take the entire thing apart, the entire back panel apart, or to cut that back slat.
Ooh.
So what I did was I decided to cut the back slat.
Okay.
So in order to do it in a way that was most easily put back together in an undistinguishable way, I cut it at a compound miter.
Yep.
So it was at a really crazy angle, which gave me a nice big surface area to glue back together. And it went back together absolutely seamless. You couldn't even see that cut. The break was definitely visible because it had been broken for a long time.
Yep.
So there was a lot of dirt and previous repair attempts left in that crack.
Bit of glue and just
so that was a lot of fun to get. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to get that cleaned out. I soaked it in hot water. Was using dental picks and things like that to get it cleaned out as best as possible. And then for things like that, what I like to use putting them back together, and same with that compound miter, is you can't really just clamp them because they move apart when you do that. So I just use painter's tape, or masking tape, because it has a little bit of stretch to it, and it's just enough to force pieces together. So I taped them up 6 ways to Sunday after gluing them and got that back together, and then just trimmed a small piece off the top of the slat and a small piece off the bottom of the slat so that I could get it back in. The piece that I cut off the bottom, I put into the mortise first and then slid it in so it's nice and tight. You can't even tell that it was ever out.
Oh, wow.
So that was the most visible thing. The hardest thing, though, was the rocker that came off. There were some very, very ancient screws used to hold this rocker to the bottom of the leg. And it's not a good method to use, like, period, because you're trying to put screws into end grain on the bottom of the leg. And it's just not a very good tactic. 2 of the 4 legs had split over the years because of that force. So I had to repair that too. But the really tricky thing was that when this rocker came off, it was pulled down from the legs. So it snapped the screws. The screws are really brittle. And so there were pieces of screws still in the leg.
So are those screws part of the original build, or are they part of a repair? Okay.
No, they were part of the original build. And I mean, they were ancient. They were very brittle. I tried extracting them and they just disintegrated. I couldn't get a hold of anything to pull them out. So I have a set that's called a reverse tap set.
Yeah.
So you can use that to unscrew a screw that has been broken off. And that just obliterated the material that was left in the chair. It was really bad.
Yeah, for those that don't know, basically all that does is you can drill a hole and then it's threaded the opposite way. So you can use a drill, and as it's digging in, it's pulling the thread out. And usually it's a hardened steel, so it can actually dig into a hardened piece of hardware. But I imagine in this case, if it's all rusted, it's just going to chew up whatever's in there and it's never going to get purchased. And as soon as it does, it's just going to disintegrate.
Yeah, it never was able to bite into anything without that material just breaking off, flaking off, really. I mean, it was incredibly brittle. So what I had to do for that rocker was actually move it over on the legs. So I had to drill new holes into the bottom of the legs to secure this piece back in, which I did with dowels. So I used through dowels and glued them all the way through. And when you do that, you have a long grain to long grain. So the grain of the leg is running vertically. My dowel grain is running vertically. and the rocker the grain is running horizontally. So on half of that hole through the rocker, I have long grain, the other half is end grain. All of the surface area of the dowel and of the leg are end grain. And in a glue joint, what you want is end grain to end grain. That's what creates a really strong bond, because
Okay.
glue sucks into end grain instead of holding it together. It just kind of sucks into the pores. So that's what I had to do on the rocker, was dowel it. I did the same thing on the arms. Those dowels had fallen apart. So I had to redo that and did through dowels all the way through the arms, with some oak. And those were fun, the dowels,
Yeah, I was going to say, can
because
you talk a little bit about those dowels? Because I think there was a little
yeah,
bit of a story on those.
yeah. So the dowels that were already in this rocker, is part of how I could tell that it had been apart before, because the original dowels have a spiral groove cut around them to increase surface area and make your glue bond better. That is a very, very old style of dowel that went out of popularity in the late 20s, early 30s. And that's when they really started moving to what we see today, which is the dowels that have tons of little ridges all the way around them. And there was a couple of joints that had those in there, so I knew it had been apart before. I prefer to make my own dowels, out of matching stock. So this was an oak chair. So what I did is I took some flat plate metal, and using a carbide or a cobalt tipped drill bit, I drilled my hole through the metal that was the size I wanted my dowels to be. And then what you do is you cut I think they were like 7/8 for this. And so what I did was, drill a 7/8 hole through. I took a piece of sacrificial oak that I had around the shop and cut it down to inch by inch, like a long strip of inch by inch, and then just use the spoke shave to shave the corners off and taper the end of it a little bit, just with a Sloyd knife. Then you stick it in the hole you drilled through the metal, and you just hammer it through the metal. And those edges, sharp edges of the metal hole, strip it down to a perfect dowel.
I can't believe that works.
Yeah, it's great. It's super easy. Super easy. Like, I have a piece of metal that I've drilled a bunch of different,
Yeah,
holes
sizes
in
them.
that are my common sizes for dowels. And so I can just whip them out real easy and quick when I have to use them. And the nice thing is you can do it in a material that matches your project really well.
Yeah.
So by the time I was done, it looked like these dowels had been there.
Yeah, it's an amazing technique, that through dowel method, because I'd never, like growing up watching my dad do woodwork, it was always you use dowel to hide joints. And then I was watching like a kayak making build and how they basically would just do a through dowel. And I was just like, oh, well, that's way easier than trying to hide a dowel and line it up and using a jig and all that kind of stuff. And to me, it's like, well, it looks like you can see the joint, which to me, I like always being able to see those joins and see how it's put together. And it's a technique that I've used a couple different times. Just, for me, it's easy. You line it up, clamp it, drill it, put your dowel in. And like you said, you can get the matching wood then as well. But yeah, I was actually thinking about it the other day about how commercially they make dowel. And I assume it's a similar technique to that, where they're basically taking, inch by inch or whatever square bits and basically are pushing it through some kind of system like that.
Yeah, it's what's really interesting about that is, so about the same time frame where the industry was moving from those spiral cut dowels to the ridged dowels, and things were becoming more industrialized in furniture making. There was also the first iteration of the arts and crafts movement, which was fighting vehemently against this industrialization of furniture making. So in the States, the most prime example of this were a couple of brothers called the Green Brothers, and they were architects by trade, but they designed all the furniture that went in their homes as well. And they designed it in a way that the architecture of the home and the furniture, that the joinery was highlighted and celebrated rather than hidden away. So it's a very old style, to use things like through tenons or through dowels. And they were really bringing that back and incorporating it in a way that it became a feature of, of what they were working on.
It's like modern dovetails, how people really like to see their dovetails. While, you go back 100 years and people were trying very, very hard to hide all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's really fun to do. And, other than that, I had those pesky cracks in the legs to contend with. And there's really there was no movement in the wood. I couldn't squeeze it together to get those cracks. They were just dry cracks from many, many years of hard use. So really the only thing you can do in that instance is to stabilize that void. So I just used an epoxy resin to completely fill those voids. And the nice thing about that is an epoxy resin will fill a cavity, whereas things like wood glue or some other glues like hide glue, they don't fill a cavity. They're really meant for sticking two pieces together, and you've got to force those pieces together. But if you have cracks or voids or anything in those mating surfaces, a resin epoxy is really the way to go.
Oh, very good. Did you have to, I assume then you did some kind of just quick sand on it and hit it with a clear varnish, or how did you end up finishing it?
So for finish, it was filthy. It was very, very dirty and neglected. So once I got my repairs done, I didn't really sand because I didn't want to remove the original finish and disturb the patina of the piece. But I wanted to clean it up.
Yeah.
So
what was the original finish on that? Was it a paint or was it a stain?
I think it was probably shellac. Okay. Is what my guess is. Once a piece gets kind of to that age, it can be kind of hard to tell. But it was either a varnish or shellac. Okay. I'm pretty certain. I didn't want to disturb that patina at all. So I literally just took soapy water, like dish soap and hot water, and rubbed everything down with a rag first. And then the spots that were, really built up and bad, I cleaned off with that soapy water and some 4-aught steel wool. There were a couple places where I did have to scrape because I did take it apart. I did take the chair apart to some degree. Most of it was put together with hide glue, which is glue that's literally made from animal hides and hooves and stuff like that. Yep, it's the really nice thing about that is I just actually put up a video about this. You can melt hide glue with hot water. Yeah. So you just pour hot water in the joint and you can take it apart. When you go to put it back together, if you put new hide glue on, that new glue will melt the old stuff and reconstitute it. It's great.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, the old hide glue, because you always grow up hearing about, oh yeah, when the horse is getting old, gotta go take it to the glue factory, and you're like, what does that even mean? And I remember watching a documentary. Well, it was kind of a documentary, but it was about a guy building a house out in the sticks, and he basically set the challenge of everything had to be recycled or made from scratch. And so he was out there like using rabbit parts to make glue, and you're like, what? How does that even work? And then you start to think about it. It's like, well, when you make like paper mache, flour and water, that's a kind of glue. So it makes sense that if you've got something like proteins, which are long chains, it's going to act like a binder of some description or a polymer. Because I mean, PVA glue it's just a polymer that's in liquid form, and it's got these long chains that can then bind together. So it makes sense that, if you boil down this natural hide, hair follicles, it's a lot of long proteins that are going to want to bind together. But it's super fascinating, the history of glues, because I imagine that hide glue was around for millennia of years.
Oh yeah.
And it's only really been in the most, the recent 100 years that, we've got these super glues and epoxy resins and, the wonder of chemistry kind of coming to the forefront.
Yeah. Even resin epoxies have really been around for a long time in some forms.
Yeah, like your saps, I assume, like your natural wood resins.
Yeah, looking at pitch and things like that were used. Yeah. The only downside to them was they were also highly flammable. So
that's why you build boats out of them.
Yeah, that's what they use to build ships. It's all right. Don't worry. That's why sailors are always scared of fires.
Yep.
But yeah, so there were I found hide glue, PVA, wood glue, and hot glue on this thing. So I had to scrape it down a little bit too. But once I got it cleaned, then I just repolished it with some furniture paste wax and 4/0 steel wool. And that thing looked great. It really came to life, and a lot of those brighter wood tones came back out, but it still had the wear and the character of an old chair.
I love that. It's because you can't build a chair to look like that. Well, you can. The film industry does it all the time, but to have that real history, I love repairing things. I know that when it comes to antiques, people are like, just leave it, don't touch it. It's like, well, I think repairing it is fine, because if you repair it, then you can use it, and if you use it, you're going to keep it. If something's just in the corner looking all nasty because you don't want to touch it, eventually it's just going to get lost and somebody's going to throw it out, and even if it was worth a lot. So no, I love good repair stories.
Yeah, I love have you ever seen the show Repair Shop?
I don't think so.
Okay, you have to watch it, and anybody who's listening to this, I highly suggest. It's a show from the UK, so I'm guessing it was probably originally put out by the BBC, but it's on Netflix. At least some of it is now, and it's called The Repair Shop.
Okay,
and it's the idea kind of came from this guy who's a very prominent furniture restorer and designer in the UK. And they set up shop at a living history museum.
Okay.
So it's in an old thatch roof barn.
Yep.
And they brought together experts from all sorts of different fields. So they have, furniture restorers. They have this guy who is an expert with watches and clocks. And they've got, fabric experts and leather workers and, all this stuff. And people bring their old family heirlooms that are busted and need love into them, and they bring them back to life. And it's really fun because they struggle too with that kind of balance of repair versus restore, and how far does something go. It's intensely interesting and amazing to watch these craft workers at their best.
Yeah, but just before we move on, it's my favorite anecdote about restoration is the old Batman mask was made out of a foam latex. And I don't know what you know about foam latex, but being a natural product, it rots like anything. So it's a huge problem in the film prop industry where people are trying to save their old props. And so they wanted to save this Batman cowl. And basically the people that went to restore it went, yeah, we really can't do anything. So they kind of symbolically pretty well made a brand new one out of silicone, and then they sprinkled in a couple powders of the original mask, and it was like, well, that's not really a restoration, is it? That's just you making a replica of the original because the original's no longer there. But yeah, it's like you go from one extreme to the other. It's like, oh no, we restored it, we took the original, and it's like, okay, that might be pushing the limit a little too far. But no, that's a great project. I do have just one final one question about this, because old rocking chairs are awesome in the fact that they don't have like kind of any safety ends on them. So how much travel did this have before the child tipped upside down in that rocking chair? Or was it a fairly good designed one?
No, it was a really well designed one. The craft worker who did this, or it was probably a company because it was done with dowels and on more of an industrial scale, but it was a great design.
Okay, that's
Um,
good.
and yeah, it was a very basic rocking chair. It wasn't one of those. I don't know if you've ever seen the rocking chairs that the rockers actually sit on another wood platform,
Oh, yep.
and there's steel cables that make it impossible for it to tip over, which is a very old design, actually. I believe it originated with the Dutch, if I remember correctly.
Sounds Dutch.
Um, it's a great design, but it wasn't one of those. It was just a very basic rocking chair. And the other thing I did do with it was the bottoms of the rockers were very dried out and splintered. So I covered them in velvet.
Yeah.
The bottoms of the rockers, so they can put it on a wood floor and it won't mar the wood floor. They can put it on carpet and it won't snag the carpet.
Yeah, that's something that I need to do on a couple of beds that I made, is I need to put some felt or velvet on the bottom because I move them around and the floors aren't looking good, but we won't talk about that. So no, I love this project. It's one of the favorite things.
So I know you've been on vacation and you've been, trotting around Australia with the family and taking in adventure and culture. But what has been on your workbench?
Well, let's go back a little bit. I don't know, in my time in the US, there's a very kind of like two styles of camping. You've got your fifth wheel RV kind of style, which is awesome because everything's just so comfortable. And then you've got like you've in a tent and you're backpacking. Like there really isn't a kind of middle ground. Well, in Australia, we do what we like to call four-wheel driving. I am not a partaker of this activity, but basically you find a track, which isn't really a track, and you try and get your four-wheel drive to the end of it. Basically there's a lot, like it's a real big hobby here. Like I said, I don't really know much about it, but the goal is to get to the end of said track. And if you get there, you high five and then you turn around and go back. But built around that, there's a whole camping aspect to that. So with that, they started building trailers and caravans that can go off-road in these really extreme environments. And what happened is people started wanting trailers that were smaller or caravans that were smaller. And so what started to happen is, I know in the US, you do have those pop-up campers, right? Where they pop up and then they slide out. And as far as I know, that's the only main style of camper that you guys kind of have over there. While in Australia, they kind of just let their imagination run wild. And so pretty well from a caravan to just a basic trailer, there's everything in between. So there's styles of what we call camper trailers that have what they call a soft bottom. And so basically, you know how you have the rooftop campers that pop open. Basically, they have those that sit on a low end trailer. So it's just kind of like a 6x6 trailer or 8x8 trailer, something like that. And it folds up and it pops open, and there's tents, and it's quite a large footprint. There's ones like mine that I have, which is what they call a hard bottom. And so you have the trailer sitting here, and you have the trailer top, and it basically folds up and sits on the ground. And when it's doing that, the frame pops out. And so this becomes the bed. And then you've got like a nice hard floor. There's what they call front folders. So if this is your trailer, it actually kind of folds like this. And this becomes the bed. And what's exposed is actually like a seating area. And so they have like fold out kitchens and things like that. And there's you go to a campsite in Australia, it's just, there's clearly no directional evolution into one key winning design. Like everybody's got a different design and everybody seems to be happy with all these different designs. However, being a trailer and a camping trailer, you can imagine that when you go to leave a campsite, there's a lot of bits and pieces you need to make sure. Obviously, you've got to pack it up. Like a caravan, there's stabilizers. You've got to make sure your electricals are connected. You've got to make sure like the dolly wheel is lifted up. Otherwise, bad things happen. And so we bought this trailer a couple of years ago, and we were on a trip down to where my parents live. And it's a 2-day trip. So it's about 22 hours of driving. So it's a pretty decent trip. And so we drove 15 hours down the first day, 8 hours on the next day, set up the camper in between, and, you know, stacked our 3 children like sausages on the floor. And me and my wife had this nice queen bed. It was awesome. So we were good on the way down, you know, we're all awake, we're all good to go. On the way back, after a week and a half, 2 weeks of, you know, holidays or vacation, catching up with family and running around, we were headed back. And so we're going to do the same thing back, you know, 12 hours, stop overnight. Well, the next morning, I went to pack up the camper. I'm like, yep, let's go, get on the road. We've got 10 hours, 12 hours drive. We're going home. Except I left the stabilizers down and I left the dolly wheel down. And in doing that, I actually damaged the rear wheel tires, which then after an hour, one of those tires blew on the side of the road, which resulted in us having to pull over and dismantle the whole back of my Subaru Outback to pull out the spare tire. And the remaining 8 hours of that trip, sitting there going, please don't blow the other tire. And it was New Year's Day, so absolutely nothing was open. And yeah, rural Australia, think driving kind of like Montana, like between Montana and Idaho, like there's stuff out there, but there's not a lot of stuff. So that's the drama. And 2 years later, you know, we've used the camper. We've had a few flat tires since because we seem to be cursed in that way, but they weren't my fault, so I can take solace in that. But we were out camping again, you know, same trailer. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. So that's the background. So that's the problem statement. Now we're going to jump to another industry. And what do you know about flying and planes?
Well, my brother-in-law happens to be a member of the Air Force, now reserves.
Yep.
And he works, he's worked on the flight line. He's worked, you know, with instrument test and repair. He is a pilot. So I've been around it and learned quite a bit from him in terms of some of that stuff.
So just like on a plane or with a camper, when they fly, I'm sure you've gone around the tarmac and you've seen big red tags that say remove before flight. So that is what my project is at the moment, is I'm basically creating a checklist and tags that I can go around to my various, you know, do not go anywhere until you have pulled this tag, because then you'll go, that stabilizer is still down. So obviously I've learned my lesson that a lot of it is just rushing. Don't rush. Make sure you go through that checklist. But I thought it'd be a bit of fun as well, because this trip was quite nice. It was just a kind of a 12-hour drive and then set up. And so we had plenty of time. It wasn't a kind of drive, set up, drive, set up, drive, set up. But yeah, so when I got back from that trip, I was like, all right, I'm going to make some of these tags. But obviously you can purchase them, but yeah, things cost money. And most of those ones that are used for actual aircraft, you know, they're just kind of a lightweight plastic that's been printed on. I didn't actually have any red fabric or plastic that would kind of fulfill that. So what I do have is I have an old sail. And I thought, you know what, I have a sail. That is a pretty tough, you know, fabric. Actually, I've got a piece of it here. And I actually used this to make a bag. But it's white. And I thought, well, instead of having a red fabric that I kind of spray paint some lettering on, I like if you buy these online, like as a key ring, they're just like embroidered. I didn't want to go to anywhere that expense. So what I did is I got my vinyl cutter out. Love my vinyl cutter. Silhouette Cameo 3 for those playing along at home. Although nothing against cricket, but there are controversy in the cricket world at the moment. And so, yeah, I whipped up some lettering. So I just made a list of all the things that I want. So I've got like trailer lock, I've got the chain, I've got the trailer brake, you know, any of the things that basically you want to check before you head off. And then on the other side, because I like to have fun, I've got remove before flight. And so what I did is I put the lettering on, and then I spray painted it red. I had some red spray paint left over from another project, and so I just spray painted it. I did think about trying to screen print it, but for what I'm doing, like if I was doing a bunch of just remove before flight and I was just doing the same thing, I'd probably screen print it, just because that once you've got that set up, you can kind of just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But because I kind of had a custom thing, I just went along with that. And what you find on the real things is they're all custom parts. Like if they're to stop like an airspeed indicator, it'll be a custom part with it all kind of made into one piece. What I've decided to do is just go with more of a Velcro. I've just got Velcro on one side, and then I can just slide it through like a handle, and I can just kind of have it. Here's my test piece. So turned out pretty good. And then what eventually I'll do is I'll have like a roll bag where I can have like 5 or 6 key rings, and I know that basically if all my tags are in there, I'm good to go. Or if I'm missing a tag, I have to go find where that tag is. And so the hopeful plan is that when we set up at a campsite, or as soon as I set up the camper, all of these tags go on. And then I put that case, in the visor or on the steering wheel. And I know that as soon as I hook up to the trailer, I need to not go anywhere until I've got that full. So that's the plan. It's a pretty quick project. It shouldn't take me long to sew it all out. I've got most of it already all cut out. The sail fabric isn't really the best. Something thinner probably would have worked, but like I said, I didn't really have much thinner. If I did go with any of the fabric that I have, the texture of the fabric would have probably made the spray painting of the stencil not work as well, and it would have been a lot fuzzier. And if you have a look, like some of these worked out quite well, but you can see on that like it is a little bit fuzzy, but at a distance, it looks fine. So yeah, something a bit of fun, something that I've actually had in the back of my mind for a couple of years, ever since that incident. And every time I managed to be able to reuse the stabilizers. They just kind of got a little bent. It wasn't a big deal. But I did end up having to completely replace the jockey wheel or the front dolly wheel because it just got completely mangled up. So yeah, hard lesson learnt for the amateur camper. But yeah, so the sewing machine's getting a bit of a workout this year or this week on what's on my workbench. But yeah.
So to be clear, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Yep. So for your lettering, you didn't use the vinyl, from the vinyl cutter as a decal, but correct, as a stencil.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So you put it on, spray painted, and then peeled that off.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So the full process is, and what I did when I bought the vinyl cutters, I bought 2 rolls. I think they're like 100 yards of painting decal or painting stencil vinyl. So it's specifically designed to be able to peel off. I don't think I have any here, but basically what the first step is you obviously cut it, then you have to what do they call it now? I can't remember the correct term, but you basically remove all the excess. So in that case, it was all of the big stuff. And then you get a transfer, which is kind of like another vinyl. It's kind of like a contact vinyl, which is because it's all got to be like slightly less sticky or slightly more sticky than the previous step, but less sticky than the next step. So you want this transfer to be stickier than the paint stencil is to its backing, but not as strong as whatever that is to your final fabric. So then you basically lift off that lettering, and then you put the lettering down onto your fabric in this case, and then you peel that off, and you hope that it's all in place. This was pretty easy stenciling compared to some stuff that you do. Like most stencils, just you kind of pick up a letter, put it back down if it's not in quite the right place, and then you make sure that's in good place, and then I just spray painted it. Because I'm hoping that with the spray paint, the idea is that these don't, sit out on the trailer for weeks, out in the sun. They're kind of they get put on when I know like the day before we're going to leave, it's like, all right, go around, put it all in place so that, you know, at 6 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to get kids have breakfast, get them dressed, get the camper set up, you don't miss something. Although what I've been doing now is I pretty well just ask my wife to go around and double check everything, because it's just not worth having an ego when it comes to these things. If you think you're going to be the hero and I'm going to pack it up in a record time and we're going to get on the road, that as soon as you have that attitude is when it bites you. And yeah, that was not a fun day, with that terror of driving back going, I hope the other tire doesn't blow. But, you know.
So what did you have to do? I'm not terribly familiar with like legit sail material.
Yep.
What did you have to do with the edges, you know, your cut edges? Did you sew those, or is there a way to treat those so things don't unravel? Or okay, so
yeah, so this type of, it's like a denier. These are pretty good cut edges. So yeah, it's a pretty good cut edge, because it's a woven fabric, but then it is treated to keep it like as a waterproof. Obviously a sail, you want it to be windproof. So on a raw edge, it doesn't generally, but it will eventually, kind of like as you work it and work it. So all I did was I just hemmed it over. So you can kind of see it here. So in that part there, it might fray a little bit, but that's not really here nor there. And then the rest is all hidden by the Velcro, which does make it a little bit more work on the sewing machine. My poor $50 sewing machine from Walmart gets a workout when I do these kind of things, especially when you're doing like the end here, where you've got it like doubled over. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of, you know, pretty thick fabric. But sorry, what's a few snapped needles between friends?
What kind of sewing machine do you use?
It's just a $50 sewing machine from Walmart. So my wife inherited a lovely German sewing machine that some point stopped working, and we need a sewing machine, or my wife did, or I did, or I don't know. So we went to Walmart, and we're like, we're not going to buy the cheapest one, which was I think like $30 or $20, like literally nothing. We'll buy the second cheapest. And yeah, I still have it. I have to actually put it into a converter box because of the power difference. I've blown the light, and I can't find a replacement bulb here in Australia. So yeah, it makes it quite difficult to be able to see things. But yeah, no, it is a hell of a machine. Like it does have a steel frame. It's by no means anything fancy. It's got basic stitches, and I am looking to replace it, but I just haven't got around to it. And it just keeps working. We actually got given a machine from my mother-in-law, and that kind of fell off the back of a truck, and it wasn't, you know, she got it for a good deal and she ended up giving it to us, and that one ended up breaking as well. So we've gone through two, I'll say it's me. My wife didn't break any of them. I think I did. But yeah, we've basically gone through these two kind of higher end. I mean, I say higher end, I think they're more in like the $500 to $1,000 range machines. But this $50 one, and I mean, and I have abused the junk out of it. I mean, I have sewn leather. I have sewn, you know, sailcloth with it. And it generally does a pretty good job. It's not perfect, and you've got to fight it a little bit to get it to work. But yeah, I've made corsets with it. I've made lace dresses with it. I mean, I've used it for absolutely everything, and it just keeps coming back for more. I mean, it sounds horrible when you're using it. It sounds like you're trying to kill a grandfather clock or something, but it's, yeah, I have the way I treat my tools are, I like to buy a cheap tool and figure out how to use it. And I usually treat it like junk. And then if it breaks and I know I'm going to use it, I buy a proper one. And then I treat that kind of like junk until I basically, when I say junk, I mean, I use it hard. I don't abuse it, but I don't try and baby it. And then after a while, if it survives that, it then becomes a real soft spot. And then I will repair it, and I will love it, and I will rebuild it. And I've got a hammer here that I got given as a kid. I think it was in my Christmas stocking when I was like 10. And I love that thing. Like it was nothing special for so many years, but then when I kind of sat and realized I'd had that hammer for 20 years, I was like, you know what? I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to sand back the oak handle. I'm going to refinish it. I'm going to not blue. I'm going to like heat treat the, well, not heat treat. Keep using the wrong words. I'm going to like heat up I'm going to clean the steel of it. I'm going to linseed it, coat it while it's hot, and basically just redo the end of it because it was getting a bit loose. And yeah, now I love that hammer and it's sitting there. And that's generally how I treat my things, is until they've basically earned my respect. And then once they've earned my respect, it's like nobody's taking my baby away from me. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's how I roll. And I've actually got a hard drive that sits on my computer that I framed because I bought it in this like secondhand laptop, and that laptop died just as I had finished off a major chemical engineering project, and it was like worth like 60% of my grade, and I'd literally clicked like save or transfer to like a disk, and then my computer died. And so it's like I've got a little like plaque on the back which explains how this hard drive kind of like got abused and it did all this work and it saved my butt, and then it chose to die. And then I ended up putting it in a portable hard drive holder for like another, I don't know how many years, but yeah. So any kind of thing like this sewing machine now, I'm never getting rid of it because it's an old friend at this point, and it shouldn't still be working as well as it is, and it just keeps on going. And yeah, that's how I roll.
Yeah, it's we have not a super nice sewing machine, but it's a pretty decent Singer. And I did for Katie's for her pottery bench, I made a canvas cover that goes over it and velcros on for when she's wedging clay. She needs a canvas surface for that. So I had canvas doubled over on the ends, and then was sewing the velcro onto that doubled over canvas. And I got everything kind of lined up and set up in the sewing machine, and just kind of crossed my fingers and hit the pedal. I hope this works.
Yeah, for a lot of these, I need to hand crank it through to actually get it through. But once it's going, gets a bit of momentum, it's all good. Usually I'm breaking needles before I break the machine, so that's usually my indication of it's time to maybe rethink what I'm doing when I've snapped a couple of needles. It's like maybe I'm pushing things a little too hard, but it is. I routinely go through Craigslist or Gumtree or those websites and be like, because you can usually pick up a pretty good sewing machine, not too bad. But I did get gifted a serger or an overlocker, depending on what you want to call that. That was too difficult for my mother-in-law to work, so I got that for Christmas. So that's kind of I'm learning that, and then I'll probably look at what I can do to fix up my this other sewing machine, or get another one, and then put this one out to pasture for backup projects. So with that, it's been a good catch up, I think. Where can people find more about you, Chili?
Well, if you want to see more of what I'm up to, as always, you can find me on YouTube, Orwood Solutions, or on Instagram, Orwood CS, and Facebook at Orwood Solutions, and my website, orwoodsolutions.com. Where would I go if I wanted to find some more of your stuff, Andrew?
So I mainly live on the YouTubes. Not a huge amount of content coming out these days, but we do get something out there every couple of months. Other than that, craftybeetroot.com. Any search for Crafty Beetroot, there is an Instagram. You might find something there, but again, not a lot. This is where you find me the most at the moment, but hopefully we'll get some. I've got lots of videos in the works. They just need to be edited, and that takes time, and I'm too busy making really useful things like remove before flight tags for my trailer. But then for those of you that want to find more about us, you can go ahead and go to whatsonyourworkbench.podbean.com, I believe. There'll be links in the descriptions. They will be retroactively input into all of the previous nomenclature for previous podcasts. As I mentioned at the start, we are now officially live. So you can kind of backtrack as to how far ahead we are, but there might be some small changes here and there as we kind of get this sorted out. I am completely brand new to podcasting, as you have probably been able to tell by the last 5 weeks, and we are looking for any feedback. Reviews, I hear, are very good. Subscriptions are very good, I hear. But yeah, any feedback, we want to hear it to improve this experience for everybody. So we're having a great time. We want you guys to have a great time, and we appreciate you listening. So we look forward to finding out what is on your workbench next week. Thank you.